Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you the first part of a two-part review series on the Fuji 18 to 55 millimeter f2.8-4 OIS lens. Now this, of course, is one of two options that Fuji shooters have for a standard zoom. Now in this case, of course, we're looking at Fuji's APS-C X mount, and so that's a 1.5 times crop factor. And so in this case, the 18 to 55 millimeter translates to a 35 millimeter or full frame equivalent of 27 to 84 millimeters. Certainly a very useful focal range. However, Fuji also has a more premium 16 to 55 millimeter option that has an even better 24 to 84 times 84 millimeter zoom range. And so in the case of that lens, it's also a constant maximum aperture of f2.8. It has weather sealing, which this one does not. But this also has a much smaller form factor. It has a faster maximum aperture than what a lot of competing kit lenses do. You know, the focal length is basically identical to what a lot of camera makers offer. So here's Canon's equivalent for their EFM APS-C mirrorless system. And so they're 18 to 55 millimeter. It's smaller, more compact, obviously, but it also sports a much slower maximum aperture that's pretty common of f3.5 to f5.6. What that tells you is that at any given point, the maximum aperture of this lens is at minimum 2/3 stop faster, in many cases a full stop faster. On the wide end, it's f4 versus f5.6. I'll also note that going through that zoom range, that the maximum aperture, it closes, rather than jumping, it actually closes by steadily 1/3 stops along the way. So at 23 millimeters, you drop a third stop, 35 millimeters, another third, and then at around 55 millimeters, you've dropped, obviously to your final stop. So it doesn't jump right to the smallest maximum aperture. And so it certainly has some advantages over your typical kit lens. It has a higher grade of build quality. It also has a higher price tag, and so we'll explore that a little bit as a part of that. It also has arguably a little bit more of a premium focus system in that it has their linear motors in there, and so you have fast and quiet autofocus, which we'll explore a little bit as a part of this episode here today. First of all, however, I'm going to give you a closer look at that actual build, handling, the design of the lens, and so you can take a look at that. And then we'll meet up here again, and we'll talk a little bit more about autofocus and how the optical image stabilization works. Now, there's a few kind of unique aspects to this lens, and so let's take a look at it. I mean, first of all, looking at the bare lens itself, this is obviously a more natural mount for a more natural match for a smaller camera like the X-T30. And so I specifically wanted to review it on the X-T30, even though I do have the X-T3 on hand as well. But a few things. We've already noted there is no weather sealing here, and so there's no lens gasket. There are two switches here on the side of the lens barrel. One of those is the on and off for the optical image stabilizer. You've also got an option here for how to control the aperture ring. Now, something a little bit unique about this is that if you switch into the A position, aperture ring will actually just be controlled from within the camera, as is the case on a lot of other lenses. If you switch into the aperture mode, it does give you control over that aperture in 1/3 clicks. What's different about this aperture ring than any other Fuji lens that at least I've reviewed to this point is that you don't actually have any indicator where the various apertures are noted, and neither is doing something like this. It's not actually controlling or changing the aperture, as you can see. And so this aperture input, even if you're in the manual aperture mode, is going to route information through the camera body, which will then control aperture. So just a slightly different approach. At the same time, however, I do like having that ring because it just gives you a little bit more direct control over aperture. And I find too, a lot of times lenses that do have an aperture ring, I'm a little bit more conscientious about aperture. Although at this stage, I'm fairly conscientious overall, just from experience. But anyway, certainly not a bad thing to have there. Now, what you have next is you have the zoom ring. And so as you can see, just a single inner barrel will extend out a couple of inches, 4 or 5 centimeters. And so you can see that the action there is nice and smooth on that, no concerns over that. And then here you have the focus ring, which of course with all of these Fuji lenses for the X mount, it is focused by wire. And so once again, there's no electronic coupling to any of the, or excuse me, no mechanical coupling to the lens elements. And so focus input from this has to be routed through the focus motor, and so it has to be on, it has to be in the correct mode and active, and then that focus ring will activate. Looking around up front, you can see I do like the front fascia of Fuji lenses. It just, for whatever reason, I have a preference for lenses that have a fascia with lens information on there. I mean, it's stylish for photos, for one thing. I feel like a lens is more finished when that information is there. You know, and of course your mileage may vary. 58mm filter thread, pretty common size here, and so no concerns when it comes to that. The lens itself is it's got a lot of metal bits along with some engineered plastics, but there's no question that this build grade here is, a cut above anything that you're getting for most other systems in terms of the basic kit lens as far as that goes. Pedal-shaped lens hood is included, which of course is not the case in many cases for, say, a Canon or a Nikon equivalent. And so anyway, that's certainly a nice touch. Now, this looks and behaves a little more premium than what the standard kit lens does, but it's also priced a little bit more premium. Right now, using as of today prices on B&H Photo, it's $599 for this particular kit lens. It's $1099 for the 16-55. So both of these are priced at a more premium point. Most kit lenses can be had for the, around $300 or less range. And so certainly it is priced at a more premium point, and so it needs its performance to behave similarly. Now, when it comes to your maximum magnification, it comes at 55mm. There's a minimum focus distance of 30 centimeters, or right under a foot. That is shared with the 16-55mm. However, magnification level isn't quite as high, and so it's 0.15 times versus 0.16 times. So from that, there's one of two takeaways. If they focus down to the same distance, from the sensor point, which would be here, that tells me that there's either this behaves a little bit less than 55mm in terms of its focal length, or there's a little bit of focus breathing, and I'm not entirely sure which is the case there. Optical design is 14 elements in 10 groups. As noted, it does have an optical image stabilization built into it, which of course makes it maybe the more useful lens if you're going to shoot handheld video. As the 16-55mm, you're pretty much going to need to shoot from either a gimbal or from a tripod. This does have less aperture blades compared to the 16-55, which has 9 aperture blades. This has 7. And then in terms of the basic dimensions of the lens, it is 2.56 inches or 65 millimeters in diameter. The length of the lens is 2.77 inches or 70.4 millimeters. That compares to 3.28 inches or 83 millimeters for diameter for the 16-55, and that lens is considerably longer. It's 4.17 inches or 106 millimeters. Likewise, there's a big difference in weight. This lens weighs in at 10.9 ounces, 310 grams, which does make it, slightly heavier than a lot of competing kit lenses, but that is in part because it has a higher grade construction. But that 310 grams is less than half what the 16-55 is. It's 1.4 pounds or 655 grams. And so, a pretty significant difference when you look at that. So as you can see, a lot of good things going on in terms of the build. It certainly is it's a cut above, the typical, engineered plastics. The action is a little bit more precise. However, it doesn't have weather sealing. It does include a lens hood, so it's got traits like that, but it also, of course, costs twice as much as what a lot of kit zooms do. And so, of course, we'll need to make up some ground when it comes to the optical performance, which we'll take a look at in our next episode. But looking at the autofocus here is one of the areas where a lot of people, it's part of the reason why this lens has a lot of defenders, in that the autofocus in this case is it's fast, it's quiet. It does the job, you know, without really any kind of slowdowns or difficulty. It's very quick, it's efficient when it comes to that. It's accurate. I haven't had any issues with autofocus accuracy during the course of my review. When it comes to video work, the autofocus is, I would say, smoother in doing focus pulls than what a number of the primes that I reviewed. One thing I've noted with a number of Fuji lenses is that there is a certain amount of what they would call a stepping motor, but it's kind of that stepping design that's a large part of what a lot of lenses do for mirrorless. It's kind of what works best with this mirrorless approach. And so, but what you notice is a lot of times with Fuji lenses, you can actually see some of the steps as opposed to just a smooth pull from one focus point to another. And so, for example, in this video, you can see that there are a few little minor stops along the way. Not that it hangs anywhere, but you can actually see some of the steps as it moves from focus to another. At the same time, however, that is better than what I've seen from a lot of other lenses. And so I do think that it does a fairly good job when it comes to that. Now, the optical image stabilization is rated at 5 stops. I will say that it, you know, for regular work, it seems to do a fine job. You know, as far as stills go, I mean, you can handhold a fairly low shutter speed without any kind of real issue. So here I'm shooting at, okay, so I shot there at a shutter speed of it's broken down to 7.5, which is kind of a weird end result. But if I zoom in and look at the image, it's crisp. I mean, I don't have any apparent, at least on this, you know, resolution on the back of the camera, fully zoomed in. I don't see any motion blur, and so certainly a positive when it comes to that. When it comes to video, you know, I've been spoiled by the fact that for years now I have been owning and using motorized gimbal systems, and when it comes to quality of footage when you're in motion, nothing compares. Certainly not the optical image stabilization in this lens. Now, Fuji has determined that for the most part, outside right now of one camera body, hopefully more to come, but they have decided to leave image stabilization in lenses for the most part. And so neither the X-T3 or this X-T30 has in-body image stabilization. So, I mean, obviously lenses with image stabilization are going to be desirable for video, but I do want to just caution you that if you think getting a lens with OIS means you're going to get footage that looks like gimbal footage, not so much. You can see from some of these video clips here that while it's reasonably stable, you can definitely tell that I'm hand holding the camera. And so I just don't want you to, you know, maybe have exceeded expectations when it comes to that. But overall, I mean, I would say that all of these things behave as they should. This is a more premium feeling, you know, kit type lens than any that I have reviewed to this point for other systems. And that includes for, you know, for Canon, both on the DSLR side, mirrorless side, and then also for Sony. And so I will say that it feels more refined. It has a wider maximum aperture than those. Focus motor is faster and more refined. However, there still are a few limitations, as we're going to see in our subsequent episode. So stay tuned for that. I'll follow up with my second episode where I'll really break down the image quality for you and give you my final verdict on the lens. I'll also do a little bit of differentiating between, a little more differentiating between the 18-55 and the 16-55 and who I think will benefit from either lens. In the meantime, if you look in the description down below, I have linkage to an image gallery where you can go and look at photos that I've taken with this lens. And also there are buying links there if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. And of course, beyond that, there are also the typical links where you can follow me on social media, including now on Instagram. You can sign up for my newsletter and stay up with all the new reviews as they roll out. You can also become a patron and help support what I'm doing on this channel. And as a bonus, you get advanced screenings of upcoming content every week. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.